Gender roles, expectations, male entitlement, sexual objectification, and discrepancies in power and status have legitimized and rendered invisible, sexualized, and helped to perpetrate violence against women. This is according to Russo and Piplot, 2006. My name is Isasipin Gosimtingi. We are live here on Young Researchers Hub, where science and the public become one. Today, we're having a conversation with a very great friend of mine that we've been in the struggle together for the longest time in the gender issues. Today, we're having Lufefe Sopazi, who has a Bachelor of Economics and which he graduated at the University of Fort Hare. He later on changed to Bachelor of Social Sciences when he was doing his honors in industrial relations, where he did his current, the topic we're talking about today, and is a master's student currently at the University of Fort Hare in the Department of Sociology, where he's looking at issues of land. Sopazi is a former Deputy General Secretary and a former Deputy President of the University of Fort Hare, institutional SRC. Lufefe is an unapologetic Pan-Africanist activist for grounded in deep investment in the intersections of knowledge, creation, distribution, struggles, regress, and social justice. He fights for the marginalized, he fights for the peasants, he fights for those who are downtrodden, who are in the trenches in our communities. He invests all his time trying to find solutions. If I remember well, when we were having FISMA's fall, he was there during the struggle and he championed the outsourcing struggle with the workers. He was there in the trenches with our people. Today we're having the conversation where he looked at the perspectives of University of Fort Hare student East London campus when it comes to gender-based violence. Lufefe, welcome, Shabam.
Welcome, Shabam. Manbulise. Thank you to you for having me, and Manbulisa kuye wonke umuntu that's here watching. Let's have a conversation.
Thank you for giving us your time, and it's been a crazy week, I know, from your side and even on my side, and based on the work that you do, I know it's been crazy. I appreciate the time you giving us to have this conversation and just unpack some of the issues that are very important to both of us. And I remember very well the struggle we've been having, which is, I think you'll unpack a lot of that when we were trying to have the policy around gender-based violence and sexual assault in our campus. And it has been a long journey. And I am happy that you took the time to research as to what is the perspective of the student. While we may have been championing this as the activist in the campus, but it is also very important to understand the views of the student. What are the students thinking? And where do we move from where they are currently? And today, it couldn't be a better day to have this conversation as we're transitioning to the Youth Month. Right after that, we'll be having June, July, and right after July, we'll be having August. And, you know, it's going to be buzzing women empowerment issues, gender-based violence. And it happens to be the 1 month where the gender-based violence cases, sexual skyrocket the most, exactly on that month. So it has always been a conversation that I think it shouldn't be confined or constrained into 1 month, or rather between August and December when we're having the 16 days of activism. I think it's an everyday conversation that we're supposed to have in order to move forward in whatever that we want to have. And for saying that is just to grateful that you took the time to do the research, and today you're giving us your time to have the conversation, and I thank you for that. I welcome you to the Young Researchers Hub. This is where we unpack issues to teach our communities. So no question is stupid. every question is important. Every question leads us to a better place of understanding. So I know between me and you, certain question we wouldn't ask because there's an assumption between me and you that we already understand such issues. But when we hear, we ask every other question. Some of them will be coming from me because it will be questions that I have had years back before I entered into the struggle for gender equality and equity. But those that I think people are still asking, the public is still asking, what is this that we're talking about? Without wasting any further time, the first thing I'd like to ask you to unpack for us is the background of your study, and just to give us also your background, your problem statement, as to why did you decide on this specific study? I know you love land issues. I would have assumed that you would go that route of studying land issues, but I also know you very much vested into this. So how did you choose between the two? Well, did you sit down and like, what do they call those things when you're trying to decide on something, which one to go for? I forgot those games.
Look, just to give you, like, I had to be sat down and persuaded. That's the first thing. It wasn't easy. My supervisor had to persuade me. I said to her, I mean, how many times have we been saying the same thing on campus? In lecture halls, in public lectures, seminars, you know, we even went to the streets saying the same thing. I joined you. I supported you, saying, and I said, no, man, come on. I need something new. I wanted to do something about, I had something in mind. I remember this was in 2018. I had something in mind about, is it migration or urbanization? I wanted to do that. Okay. I wanted to explore that. I was very interested in that. Then my supervisor persuaded me and said, no. I know you. I've seen you. I want you to be part of this. And another reason why I want you to be part of this is because you are a male figure. I want to hear your side. I want to see how you are going to be, you know, conceptualizing, exploring the concept of gender itself outside of, you know, because normally when we talk about gender, we want to talk about gender-based violence, but can we talk about gender alone? That is what she wanted me to explore mainly. You know, can you give me what is your understanding, Lufefe, about gender? And when she said that, it hit me that I've never asked myself, how do I view gender? How do I relate to this concept of gender? So we sat down, we explored, we spoke, and I had questions also. You know, when we speak about societies, we speak about societies not in generalization, but we speak about societies in their contextual form or in their contextual nature in which they are. So how do we understand gender from a general perspective and an African contextual situation? How do we situate gender in the development of Africa, in how Africa has you know, developed into where it is today? And so I had to, you know, what is this word? What is this word? I'm trying to find this word. English is very hard.
You had to unpack it in a way.
I had to narrow now this topic into one, understanding that one, Forte is not a university or an institution in isolation. It is an institution that, you know, exists in a social, you know, situation, you know, and whatever happens at Forte, even though I'm interested at Forte, I need to understand what are the influences that influence Forte. How does one heteronormativity influence how people view gender at Forte? You know, how heteronormativity excludes, you know, other identities in this concept that is gender itself? How does heteronormativity contribute to the ongoing scourge of violence, especially at that time when I wrote, this study? When I wrote this study, if you could remember, it was just 2 years, 2 years after you had left, or 1 year after we had left the university, right? And we were sort of transitioning.
You did your honors in 2017, right?
In 2018.
So it was 2 years after I've left.
It was 2 years after you left. And that is when we were, I don't know how to say transitioning, but there was a process where, there was sort of I don't know if you could term it as a change or an awareness that was rising in the students, in the student populace, speaking, talking. And that was, and I've written about that in one article that I've written in the newsletter at Forte, that it is not something that came out in abstraction. It is something that happened because there were agents, that said, we want to take a stand. We want to, and those agents, they didn't just, come up with this in 1 year. This started long before I came to Forte, 2012, 2013, 2014. And these people have contributed into what inspired and influenced me to say, look, I agree, this has to come up. And I think it came at the right time when obviously, there was a change in perception. There was a change in how people understood, related to just the concept of gender-based violence. Remember, when I first met you, let me start in 2016. When I first met you, when you had these topics, there would only be 8, 9 women, those who are usually in the seminars. Those who are usually in the seminars would be there. And right there, we had to, as males, try and understand what is going on. Like we don't know, but we did know. It's like asking yourself the obvious. You say, what is going on? But you already understand what is going on. But the problem that is there is that you don't want to relate, or you don't know how to relate, or the awareness itself in the context of Forte and in the outside context that influences Forte, it doesn't push people to want to understand, to want to relate. And I think that transition, that process, inspired me to have to, find it in me and responsibility to write, this study.
Thank you, Fefe. You take me back to a time where I was still a student at Forte. And just yesterday, I think I had those Facebook memories where you, me, Ayabonga Mtingizane, Zimbini, Nyezi, Leabona, Sneke. I forgot the other 2 ladies that were there. I think the other one was Ola. When we literally sat at Aston Chubb deliberating on those issues, and we're the only guy. And it also reminds me of a time where the likes of Lizinjani, Babalo Mati, when we're having this conversation, Ulambeso would be there, but it has always been a few number of guys. And then there'll still be, we'll be lucky on days where we had a match to have a larger audience of females and a bit of males. But on the conversation on its own, and most of the time, I could literally count people that would always be there. And if those people are not there, the conversation is not done. And it has always been a problematic issue that what happens when we leave? What happens if Lufefe decides tomorrow that I'm done, I don't want to do this anymore? That's why I'm happy that you written this study. But also I'm happy on what Yosuvabaza tried and wanted to ask, what is this thing called gender? And what is gender-based violence? And what does it look like in the bigger, the micro spectrum and the macro spectrum? How does it filter into our lives? And understanding that the University of Fort has been one of those universities that have the crisis of gender-based violence, sexual assault, rape in both campuses. And it has been Rhodes University is also the same issue. I remember they have the Rhodes silent march every 1st of August. And it's because of this outrage that has became a norm in our community, in our campus community. And you've given us your background, and I would like to understand your problem statement in this regard, as to what was your problem? Why did you want to investigate University of Fort Hare student? What did you see as a problem to say, okay, I want to investigate those particular people?
Look, to put it up straight for you, my friend, we understand where Fort Hare's lineage in terms of one. I remember when you would go into the website and type University of Fort Hare, a whole range of issues which pertain to issues of gender-based violence, violence against women. It was something that was on the public knowledge that there is an issue that is happening at the campus level, where women are being victimized, women are being violated, and that is where the context of all of this study emanated from. That I can't study it in abstraction. I can't study it out of nowhere. I need to understand what are the issues, what is there that I need to understand, about Fort Hare. Also the background of these students. Where do the students come from? Why is it that they don't understand, the issue of gender, the issue of gender-based violence? What is it that makes them not understand the dangers of heteronormativity? What is it that makes them not understand why gender roles are problematic in the development of society itself? And what is it that happens at the residence level? There were issues. I remember I entered into the SRC space in 2017, and already within that period I had learned so much about issues that were happening at residence levels, lecture halls, and these were issues that were out in the public. So I needed to start from somewhere with an understanding that, look, there are issues that are there, and I need to understand the type of university space that Fort Hare is. I need to understand the type of people that are within Fort Hare, and I need to understand that the concept of perceptions, one, is the first place to start. You don't want to start anywhere other than the concept of perceptions. What do these people understand about gender-based violence? What do these people understand about gender itself? How do they relate to gender itself? The levels of study of these people. They've been at university for this number of years, for this period of time, and what can I learn, from their differentiations in categories in terms of what is the difference between the perception of a person at 4th year level, 3rd year level, 2nd year level, 1st year level, and what could be something that has changed within the time that they have been at Fort Hare, from the time they're entering and within the time that they have been at Fort Hare. So those are the things that I needed to look into, to also to be inspired by also looking into the nuances. There's also another greater part that is very important, looking at the nuances. That, for an example, you could say the people that the participants that sort of understood what gender-based violence to a certain extent were women, because obviously maybe of their experiences, and those that didn't understand were men. But I had to have nuances. There's a person that identifies as a man, or let me say, there's a person that is socially understood to be a man, but that person doesn't identify as a man.
True.
And what was the differentiation between those two, figures in understanding gender-based violence? Who understood it better than the other in terms of, the people that are understood as men or as males, you know. So I needed to go into all those things to understand, do these people really understand? Do these people really capture what gender-based violence is? You know, and mine, you know, in terms of the research study, was not to necessarily answer, but to have a description, you know, of what is the situation at Forte in terms of the perception. You know, hence I understood it from a position of a descriptive survey, you know, because I didn't want to answer, but I wanted to have a description of what is happening at Forte at that moment in time, and also to propose going forward what needs to happen to develop the awareness and perception, you know, of these people. You know, I think let me put it.
Thank you, Fefe. And you highlight something that captures that makes me think about the situation. As you said, socially, there are people who are understood to be males, but they don't subscribe to be that. How do they understand gender and gender-based violence? There are people who are socially understood to be males and they understand themselves to be that. How do they view gender-based violence and women and different other people? And your study, Fefe, comes 2 years after we had submitted a memorandum to the university. I remember vividly, it was on the 19th of May when we handed over the memorandum to the Dean of Students requesting for a policy that addresses sexual assault, gender-based violence, and rape in our campus. And your study, Fefe, was done in 2018. 2019, the Forte University was on the news at on the ETV show Checkpoint on the very same issue. Now, when Checkpoint comes 3 years after we have been shouting and yelling and crying to have this policy in terms of our tabling of the policy. But before that, for over 4 years, the discussion has been ongoing into these issues. So we could say Checkpoint comes 8 years later plus, when we've been crying of lecturers abusing their power, students being raped on campus, students being violated by their partners, by their friends, by different people. But there's been no movement. And I'll just want you to unpack, what are your findings in terms of the perception of students of the University of Forte amidst all these things that have been happening, all these stages and progresses and phases that have taken place in trying to make Forte a safe space for them and their siblings and anyone to come after?
What I was worried about when I was doing this study, just before I answer your question, what I was worried about before when I did this study was that I didn't want it to be a straightforward study, even though it was my first ever study and experience in terms of research. But I honestly wanted to uncover all the nuances that are there, all the differences in understanding and perception. And I could say that, I tried to the level best that I could. And what was most, very interesting for me was how gender-based violence was understood. Gender-based violence was understood in a more physical form, mostly, but it was not understood from an emotional, psychological form, So there were people that understood that gender-based violence, happens in so many levels, other than the physical, form of, the violence itself. The violence can be psychological, the violence can be emotional, the violence can take many different forms, So that was the first interesting point for me. And another interesting point, was how the rise in terms of understanding what gender-based violence is in terms of the first-year students. You know, they showed one interest in even partaking and participating in the research itself. These are first-year students. They have not, you know, experienced this space in terms of the context of gender-based violence. They have not experienced this space in terms of the underlying, you know, concept of patriarchy, the underlying concept of women, you know, of oppression, silencing, voices that are silenced, you know. They haven't experienced that. These are first years, but they were the ones that wanted to partake in the study, you know, and sort of gave meaningful results, you know, participation. But as you go up into the fourth years, these people that have been in the university space, you know, they were the ones that showed little or more or less interest than first years and second years, but were even the answers, you could see that the understanding is not deep in terms of what gender-based violence is and how they view gender-based violence and how they relate to questions of gender, how they relate to you know, acceptance of other forms of masculinity, acceptance of other forms and ways of being, you know, in the context, you know, of you know, the concept of gender. So those were the most interesting things for me in terms of, you know, the participation of the participants. I think just before I where is this? Yes. Another thing that was very important is, you know, how people understood the need. There was a question of needs. You know, what is it that that these students need? You know, what do they want? What is it that, you know, can assist them, you know, going forward to feel safe, you know, to relate to one another in a manner that is not one based on, you know, social norms and expectations, you know. And one of the interesting things was that students wanted to live together.
Okay.
Students wanted to live together in their different categories of identities. They wanted to live together.
Mm-hmm.
And if you trace this, you know, back, you could find that one, in our African development, in our society, there is no much differentiation, you know, in terms of you are a male, you are a female, or you are this or you are that. There's not much differentiation, and that, you know, finding a way into the university space where there are, you know, discussions and dialogues about, is it safe for males and females to live together? But within those questions, the one point that I took from them was that they just want their residences to be safe. They want to live together, but they want their residences to be safe, and that was what that they wanted. And their proposals, you know, that they made, that there must be an increase, you know, in securities. There must be an increase in awareness campaigns and residences. You know, all of those things that they needed. There must be an office that is opened, you know, that facilitates, you know, the discussions, that facilitates the dialogues, that increases the awareness dialogues in the resident spaces, not outside the resident spaces, but inside the resident spaces. That meant that they understand that the gender-based violence mostly happens in secret. And that is where, you know, the issue of safety normally is a question. Not outside, but inside. You could feel safe with a person that violates you. And that is the nuance those are the nuances that I wanted to find. That is safety something that is in question when you are outside, or is safety a question that even when you are inside your room, you don't feel safe? To what extent, you know, do we discuss and dialogue about the question of safety? Are we talking about safety in terms of the transportation from residence to campus, or we talk about safety in the sense of just in general spaces, in our spaces, we don't feel safe. And those are the issues, that were coming out, that even in our rooms, even in our spaces, even with the people that we think we love, we don't feel safe. Yes.
Oh, okay. Fefe, you just touched the nerve on the last part, that even with the people we love, we do not feel safe. So the safety issue is not outside of our proximity, it's within. That for a moment gave me chills too, because just to reflect, when I attended the silent protest at Rhodes, when you would observe statistically, 90% of the people were violated by people they knew and they were comfortable with, be it their teacher, be it their friend, be it their friend's boyfriend, be it their boyfriend. It's someone whom they have let their guard down when they're around them. They didn't at one point ever think they'll be unsafe next to that person. And all of a sudden they're unsafe, which is, just before I go into your recommendation, I would like to understand from your research as to, oh gosh, I hope I'm not going to lose my train of thought. When you speak of safety, how do you model safety in a residence where we live together and we at one point believe that we'll be safe to each other, that will be a safe space? How would it look like to now all of a sudden we need to have 5 more securities inside the residence rather outside of the residence? How did we get to that point of a structuring of our society? As you also mentioned, that the students said, we want to live together. Coexistence is something that we want, but we want coexistence in a safe environment. Now, as you say, the perception is clear. We understand what is going on. Because if you come to a point of saying that I want to be safe, it means you understand that your body is threatened when there are certain people around you. So your perception is clear on that part. And you're also clear that you're okay living with this person, but you want to be safe around these people. And in university campus or in any other way, how do we model safety in that environment where we need to coexist? No other way around. We need to live in one residence. Would it be a solution to separate? In this instance, the students saying, no, we don't want to be separated, but we want to be safe. We want to live together.
You see, I think the first thing that I had to, understand was that patriarchy and the suppression of women, heteronormativity, which are very dominant, within our spaces, what you call social ills. And that is what I had to come into grips with in exactly what you're talking about, modeling and understanding safety. What are they saying when they're saying safety? So this goes back, to one of the most sad things, to one of the, what do you call it, a cliche, that the first thing here is the change of perception. The first thing here is the change of how do we understand ourselves as masculine beings? How do we understand ourselves outside of the dominant narratives about masculinity that are very toxic and violent towards women? I'm going to make an example, just an example. The first time when I attended your programs in 2016, I was in a position where I wanted to understand myself better than I was at that moment. I wanted to understand myself beyond what society expects me to be. And that was me being reborn at that moment to being the person that I am today. And I think that when I did this research, that helped me so much. That experience made me understand, I'm trying to get to this question of modeling of safety. It made me, understand better that in as much as these people are speaking about safety, but these people are not speaking about something outside. They're speaking about something within, that even the person that perpetuates, the violence doesn't understand, or let me say, understands that is perpetuating the violence, but doesn't understand that the question of safety will forever be a question to the person that he perpetuates the violence unto. That person will never feel safe at any moment because of the experience that the person has gone through. That even that person, when they're even within their own space, within the people that they love, they will never be able to trust and feel safe with those people. So that was what I had to come to grips with. That even in them giving me their recommendations, just before we get to that even within them giving me their recommendation, I could see that there's a I don't know if I can term it a conflict or a confusion between, is safety something that is outside, even though they are saying it, but they don't model it like you're saying. Now I had to understand that, so that I also bring that into the findings, into the recommendations, that no. The issue here is about awareness. The issue is in the mind. The more we talk, the more we change each other's perceptions, the more we influence each other. The more males become part of the spaces, the more the perception changes. And that was what I at some point I truly want to thank all the males at Forte that participated in all seminars, in all public lectures, because one, we should understand that violence against women is not perpetuated by any other being than males. and that is what we need to come to grips with, that there's no other person that perpetuates violence against women than the male figure. That is the person that perpetuates the violence. And once that person allows themselves to be able to learn, to be able to welcome other forms of masculinity, to be able to welcome other forms of being other than heteronormative thinking, that is when that person redefines. That is when that person, comes into what you call a point of Damascus, where you don't know whether to go left, right, or left or back, or left or front. But that is when you are in conflict with yourself. And I remember I wrote an article, this article that I keep pointing on to, because it started with this research, and I think that I needed to stretch it further, that males need to be in conflict with themselves. The minute that males are not in conflict with themselves, that is the position when the society doesn't develop. The male figure is not redefined. The male figure is not, deconstructed, in order to be reborn, into a new being. And that is what, I wanted to unpack just before we get to this question of safety. In that, for me, the question of safety, is not a question that I think could be one. I must point out that I don't think even myself, I was able to capture it frankly and in the manner in which it needed to be captured. Hence it needs us to take it further to say, but what is safety within the context of experiences? What is the meaning of safety when people experience gender-based violence each and every day, each and every minute? Where is safety? How is safety? Is security at the door safety? is having an alarm, safety, is being, with a family, a guarantee of safety. And those are the questions that I think, they need to be taken further, understood further. But within, the modeling of the study, I think I fell short in modeling that when I'm talking about. But I think it's a question that needs to be, unpacked and developed further. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Fefe. And today is such an emotional session for me. As you unpack, I've had conversation around gender-based violence. I've had a couple of them, but today is so closely related. And as you mentioned the issue of safety, and I was thinking as you were saying that you fell short on that, and I was like, this is exactly the point where we need to question, because I remember part of the recommendations we had for the policy was that the administration of the university needs to be removed completely from political figures in the form of student activists. Because the reason why we got to that point where student activists are the ones who are hanging administration because the university was falling short. And we're saying now remove student on this. And then the second recommendation was to say, separate the residences, especially for first years. Now, as you speak of safety and what the student wanted, I begin to ask myself that was our recommendation a solution, or were we rather dealing with a symptom than the problem? Because we're not dealing with the problem of why am I not feeling safe when I'm in your room as my boyfriend? And we're assuming that I'm not gonna date as the first year. And we're assuming that if you remove me from a male resident, and if you remove me from the vulnerability of having male comrades taking advantage of me, I'll be safe. But as you allude to it, is that the safety issue becomes an issue in secret in your room. So it means the moment we get to gender-based violence, you have already made me your prisoner to an extent that even if I were to be violated, people wouldn't know because it happens in secret. So meaning that our suggestions are not solving the problem that we're having, because like you say, it's happening in secret.
Just to add, in what you are saying, just to confirm what you are saying. I remember there was I think it's on page 41. I was looking for this. There's a distribution that I made there. There's a question asking, in what type of relationship does gender-based violence occur? And the large, distribution was someone you know.
Yeah. So it's like, if I'm violated by you as my comrade, of course we are comrades in arms, and my understanding is that I'm safe around you. And it means you've gone to a point where I let my guard down around you. Mm-hmm. And also I know of comrades who've been accused of gender-based violence in our campus, and their stature in the community of Fort Hare was so high that even if I were to come up and say, so and so has violated me, the question is not about him, it becomes about me, because his character on campus is so much that everyone believes that they could never do that. So it's the same thing with relationships. People often say that I'm scared of a boyfriend that posts me too much, because there's high likely that behind closed doors they'll be in violation. So we're scared of people who are showing a certain stature because they've become a threat, but a threat that will never be acknowledged by society because of the reputation they've built. And before we go to the questions from the public, I'll like you to unpack what were some of your recommendations in this problem that we're finding ourselves as the community of the University of Fort Hare.
this is the issue that I think was for me. It sort of didn't get to the point that when we do research, we have this goal, that we want to reach, to make a groundbreaking, sort of a study that has that creates a breakthrough in terms of the proposals and recommendations, But what I understood, was that here you've got what do you call a university space. That is one. Forgive me for saying this. Has a large number or intake of rural students, who maybe some of them are new into the experience. Some of them still understanding the university space and its dynamic, culture. Some of them still understanding, even the urban area itself and how universities function. Hence, the recommendations, were based, or drawn from a model which came out of the findings, that, the safety, could be understood, from a position of, having a security, having alarms, having transport, having a gender-based violence unit, which is, we must thank the university for that also, that it has now a gender-based violence unit, I believe, that, is in existence now and has a head, which needs to be grown also, developed, to be not just an office, but some sort of an institution within an institution, that has its own, I don't know, but it has to be a big department within the university, because this issue, is not an issue that is going to take 3 years, 4 years. It's an issue that we have to understand that it is part of the wide public. And as you say, it has been part of the political mainstream politics, that those who lead this are people that, are leaders of politics, those who speak, the more you speak about gender-based violence, the more probability that you become voted into power, popular, respected, all of those things, So it ranged from the ordinary discussion, of, having those facilities, exactly, and not a groundbreaking sort of idea of what, in the mind needs to be done. What is it that needs to be done to the minds of people to understand that gender-based violence is a serious, issue that we're dealing with within the university space, and it needs to be met with the resistance that it deserves. And it needs to be met by this resistance, starting from the lecture halls. From the day that a person enters the university space, we must speak about gender-based violence. From the day of the orientation, for me, if I was, so you have to subtract yourself from the research when you do research. But at the same time, for me, taking from what I have seen in the research, I believe, that we have to sort of start from the day of the orientation, move with the person each and every day, take out what is there and put in a new, thinking that free yourself from this bondage of thinking that, women are objects, of thinking that, gender, non-conforming people, are somewhat strange, and deserve, to be violated, and those things that they are subhuman, and they're outside of the radar of what a human is, So those are the things that, for me, they need to be properly, discussed in, the lecture halls. And I'm thankful that came out, in the findings, that most of the issues of gender-based violence, are failed at lecture halls. The conceptualization of gender-based violence is failed at lecture halls. When people discuss, issues of gender, they don't discuss them at lecture halls. They discuss them outside of lecture halls. in what is called, seminars on gender-based violence, which sit one day in a month. I mean, if you want to change the perception, you can't allow a situation where a person would sit one day in a lecture if he doesn't have class on the day, and then for a whole 3 months or for a whole quarter of a year, they'll attend another seminar that speaks about a different theme within the concept of gender-based violence. So for me, it needs to start within the lecture halls from the day of the first, university experience, that within those lecture halls, at least 15 minutes, at least 20 minutes is dedicated to discussions. At least, there should be time that is dedicated to discussions about this. What do males think about gender-based violence? What do males think about speaking, in a manner that is condescending about women? How do they relate to that? What do they say in their spaces? Those are the things that, can be, for me, it's about taking from where now I left off and develop, from that what do males speak of, in their spaces. I remember again in this article that I wrote last year, I think it was on Women's Day. I said, each man needs to define themselves outside of the category of what men are in plural form. And they need to take themselves out of the organization itself in commas. The word organization for me, I'm understanding it from a position where I'm saying the expectations, the roles, the normative thinking, the whole concept of patriarchy is organized, and it is hard to fracture or to break, So everyone wants to be accepted. Everyone wants to be viewed as a man, but no one wants to view himself as a man and define yourself outside of what men are, but define yourself in what you as a man, is in singular. Can you define yourself for who you are and subtract yourself from what other people, define you to be, expect you to be, I think, I don't know, I think I'm getting carried away.
And I love it because you're unpacking a lot of issues. And as you're talking, I'm thinking that I think speaking about gender-based violence would be more understood if, as you're saying, that if we speak about gender in class. Now, I'm thinking a lecturer that frames their accounting lecturer in a sense that when they talk about investment and finances, how is that structured in a woman's view or in a woman's life in South Africa, especially as a Black woman? Am I in a position to save? Am I in a position to even start my own business? Am I in a position to even excel in the accounting field? If you take it from a science field, as a woman, what is my position in terms of agriculture and everything? I think every lecture in our society, in class, can be structured with a woman face, because there's no part in our studies in psychology. The woman faces there of the social issues that affect a Black woman, but also affect a Black man. There's no lecture that you can frame without putting a Black man's face into that. Can you open your accounting firm? What does being an accountant look like as a Black man? What does being in the psychological terms or in the psychological world, what does it look like to be a Black man and the psychology of surviving in this country as a Black man, as a Black woman? If you go to sociology, if you go to law, who is mostly apprehended by the police? What does law look like for Black people? So what you're saying, the conversation of gender on its own can be a conversation that is have each and every day in our classes, and that can continue outside. So you're correct when you say the system on its own is failing us, because they're reducing gender conversation into seminars when gender is our reality that we're confronted with in coupling with our own skin. Those two you cannot separate, and those two can be a conversation in everyday class that we're having, in everyday session that you having as a lecturer. There's a face of a Black person, both men and women. But as we're having the conversation, my friend, on the last part, I'll be asking you some of the suggestions that you having that you think are areas of research, and I want you to think about that. But I'm gonna go on Facebook where we have a question from Bomkazi Njova, where she asks, what is your view on many cases not being reported because they are said they are politically motivated to show there's a demise of a certain comrade? We've had a lot of this, and she wants to know, what is your view on those?
The first point, I believe I deal with this also in the study. I just can't remember in which part. The first point is, this understanding that women are silent. I think that is the first point. You'll find what do you call it? They say report gender-based violence. Speak out. As if people are not speaking out. I think that is the first starting point. Why is there an assumption that people are not speaking out? Because people are speaking out. And then the second point that we need to get to is to understand how dominant, politics are at Fort Hare, firstly, or were at Fort Hare at that time. Politicians, sort of influenced everything that happened on campus. So you could understand, the questions of proximity, the questions of, power, the questions of, what is the obvious or automatic silencing of the lone and other voices of women. So that is what we need to take into consideration, about that question itself, and providing an answer, is something that needs us, to have those underlying, concept before we frame an answer, before we say, I believe that it is because of A, B, and C that did not happen. I remember there was a case that was reported. I think this is during my second term. I remember, and this was reported and went up to a situation where, when the launch took place, the vice chancellor had to say something, and then the vice chancellor said, if a case is reported and the person withdraws, that doesn't automatically mean that the person is not guilty. But it means that the questions of power, questions of the automatical silencing of women's voices has again shown its ugly head. So we need all, to take that into consideration, that a person might report, a person might not report, but it is not that a person, there's an issue of reporting of cases, but there is an issue of power. We need to sort of put this in adverse, not understand it as what it is understood to be, but what is the underlying concept? Why do we speak about reporting instead of speaking about power and silencing? Why do we speak about reporting instead of speaking about othering, exclusion? Why do we not speak about those when we speak about reporting? So I believe that in framing an answer, for me, we need to take those things into consideration. And I believe that, the vice chancellor was correct, that yes, a case might be withdrawn, but it doesn't mean that the incident didn't happen. The incident happened, and we need to take it forward. But it's just that the questions of power, the questions of relations, the questions of proximity, the questions of silencing have again found, expression. So we need to, understand that. And yeah, I think Let me park it there.
Thank you, Mhlobam. People can still pose their questions. I understand it's 7 o'clock, but I don't want us to cut the conversation without unpacking some of the issues. And I have issues that I still want you to unpack a bit. So I'll stretch it to at least 15 to 20 minutes. You write in your research that a question must be asked, therefore. Also, you're saying, okay, I'll say the preamble at top and then ask the question that you're asking. You say, you quote Cornell that states that gender is implied and required by current sexual politics. This means that we imply our gender through our performances as required by our society. And then you then have a question that say, a question must be asked, therefore, how gender as a construct itself relates to violence. Put differently, is there any link between gender and violence?
This is exactly, where I wanted to stress the point that gender is not a or let me say violence is not a concept in abstraction. And then let me be particular. Violence against women is not a concept in abstraction. It happens because something, pushes it into existence. What is that? What is this underlying concept that, creates and perpetuates and self-maintains violence against women? And that is where I wanted to point it into, that and I wanted to say this, before we got here, that there is also a shortfall that I had, when doing this study. And I think it was bringing in the concept of class, the intersections of class and race, which you put so nicely, that we cannot, take ourselves out of that. We are beings that are socially determined, within the current situation that we find ourselves in. So the questions of class and race play a very significant role in influencing how, gender develops within our situation, how gender, influences violence, how heteronormativity, excludes, defines, maintains violence against women. So that was what I was trying to point to, that there are a whole lot of, range of concepts that come together and intersect to create and maintain violence against women.
Okay, thank you, Flo. That clarifies the question of violence. And the second part, you quote Kelly, and that states that gender-based violence is a structural problem that is deeply embedded in unequal power relationships between men and women. It must also be noted that gender and sex are two different things. Sex refers to the biological distinction between males and females, most often in connection with reproductive functions. Ryan says that. And gender, on the other hand, emphasizes the socially constructed differences between men and women that give rise to masculinity and femininity. Scott and Marshall say that. So can you, before I ask all these other questions that I have, can you explain the differences in a simple term that a layman person can understand when you differentiate between sex and gender?
This is for me an organization of society. This is deliberate. When I'm saying this is deliberate, I'm trying to say when you want to oppress people, you create concepts to hide the oppression. When you want to oppress people of color, you create a concept that they are non-white to exclude them. When you want to exclude, women and oppress women, create a role, define it, categorize it, and say that's gender. So this is just a simple socio also a cultural, social cultural order that is based on class and exclusion and oppression. Remember, you are coming out, of slavery. Let me take the conversation there. You are coming out of slavery. Just yesterday, you've been pronounced as that you are free, and then you ask yourself, but culturally, I'm this being that has seen women being beat up by their husbands, that has seen women being excluded, in the participation economically, socially, and you ask yourself, but how am I going to define myself outside of that? And that is the situation that Bell Hooks speaks about, in the book We Real Cool. She speaks about that after slavery, there was a problem, that men and families and women undergone, that we're coming out of slavery, we don't know who we are, we've seen these things, we've seen how women have been excluded. And remember, capitalism is male-led. Capitalism in its construction is led by males. So already, this thing is something that is constructed for power, for ownership, for wealth, for leadership, for what Steve Biko says, a sine qua non for progress. That male, dominance is a sine qua non for progress in society. The moment that men are not leading, there will be a problem. The moment where men, are not viewed to be at the ownership of productive forces, in productive factors of society, then there will be a problem. So it creates doubt. The moment you create a socially accepted rule that women belong in the household, men belong in the production, already there, you've already excluded and rendered women as subjects to men, if not objects. So already that development in itself will show you now how this society, because capitalism now is in its rapid form, but already, you see the conversations, you see the resistance, but this resistance is met by, more resistance from the defining dominant side. That no, women belong in the kitchen, which is what has to be understood when we speak about gender. That the issue of gender is just a social differentiation between people. There's nothing different between me and you, but it's just this expectation that has been created that when you see a woman, you see someone that belongs in a certain position in society. But when you see a man, you see a non-defined, self-defining, self-perpetuating, self-growing, person, a leader. This I don't know if I'm speaking in very simple terms, but I'm trying to draw a picture that the society is in conflict within itself, because the question of gender is just solely based on oppression and exclusion.
Okay, Gamshaba. The next question that I have then is, how do we then deal with this issue? Okay, the last part I want to unpack before I go to this question that I think was a bit left behind was the issue of sexuality. Yes, the society has constructed gender in this ways, and then now we come to issues of sexuality. So I wanted you to explain the difference between the two.
Sexuality is based on the subjectivity. Who do I want to define? How and who do I want to define myself? Now that let's go back to the concept of heteronormativity, how it takes away that autonomy. Remember, there was this concept that was very spoken about in 2016. Autonomy over my body. I remember it was a concept. Yeah, I remember autonomy over my body. Now, the reason why we have a problem of sexuality is because we have a problem of autonomy. Patriarchy, heteronormative thinking or understanding, they go hand in hand, and they create this, sort of how do I put it? Where people feel obliged, or maybe not obliged, but they are groomed into a certain behavior, understanding, perception, perspective, that in order to be a man, you need to be one, muscular, and that masculinity needs to be defined within, the normative expectations of what a man is, how a man speaks, I remember there's this comedian that I love so much, Steve Harvey. I had a conflict at some point with how he speaks about manhood, that men cannot cry, but he cries at some point. But he has a conflict within himself that when you cry, you have already put yourself outside of what is expected to be a strong man. Once you have emotions, even that is always a question. There's always this perception when we talk, don't be emotional. As if being emotional is something that's outside of the human being, while being emotional is intrinsic in the person that I am. And those are the things that take away our autonomy. That a person cannot be ulufefe, but also own my own sexuality and define myself. I can define myself as a man and own my own sexuality. And I do not have to explain that to anyone. That's how and who I define myself to be. That's how and who I want to relate to others. That's how and who I want, to be known. I want to be understood, And in fact, even that concept of wanting to be understood is also for me problematic. Why must we understand people? Who gives us autonomy to understand others? Why do people need to feel understood by us? Who gives you the power to want to categorize, people and say, no, this one is outside of this. And this is the problem that I feel that this study needs to be stretched more, especially at institutions such as Forte, that are placed in deep, Eastern Cape is a very rural, social situation where, the people that are coming in, they come from outside into, the urban areas, and there's a different, hence I wanted, there's a reason why I wanted to do that study on urbanization, because I felt there was a disconnection and a conflict. Once you come from rural areas into the urban area, there's already a conflict within you. And when you speak about sexuality, say now you left rural areas, you were 17 years, you passed grade 12, come to Forte, you suddenly, identify in a certain way. And the moment you go home, back to your rural areas, you're not accepted, you're not understood, because people feel like they've got this God-given right to understand you. So these are the issues that, I don't know. I can't remember your question.
Yeah, no, you answered, Mhlobam, when it comes to the issue of gender and sexuality. And now, then my question then becomes, we have different sexualities, and we are in understanding that we are abused by different people who identify with different sexualities. And as you mentioned it, that gender then is a social construct. Now, my question is then, how do we then address gender? Firstly, is gender-based violence the term, a correct term, if I'm abused by someone who's a gender non-conformist? They don't identify to any gender. And this has been questioned a lot of where we say the name gender-based violence seems to take away certain nuances on addressing the issue, because now you're limiting it to two genders that are existing. So is the term, do you think it encompasses or addresses the issue for what it is if we say it's a gender-based violence? Because like I say, if I am violated by someone who's a non-gender conformist, can you still call it a gender-based violence? Because to them, they don't see gender.
Look, I believe in development of concepts. I think to provide, an answer correctly would be to say we should always look at how the issue at hand developed. In which context did it develop? And where are we now in terms of that? So I think to provide as an answer, we need to take into consideration that society is developing, and in our understanding of what gender-based violence is. I remember we had a discussion with a friend of mine, Saswan. I think you know Saswan Maccabi. We had a discussion with Saswan. We had a discussion with Saswan, and we were discussing this thing, that this word of gender-based violence, or this concept, sometimes people use it, recklessly. When an incident between a male figure and a female figure, takes place, and the male figure was abused, they'll call it gender-based violence. But it is not gender-based violence. It can't be gender-based violence, because gender-based violence is defined from a position of the unequal gender inequality. Let me put it like that. The unequal relations that are defined by the power relations between the two. For an example, intimate partner, violence, where, for an example, the male figure abuses the female figure because the person views that person as less, powerful than he is. I don't know if I'm making sense.
You are.
So you could that is understood as gender-based violence. Now, and it's not based on the subjective views of that person, but in how society has shaped and structured, the powers between those two people, has distributed the power between those two people, So it is gender-based violence because women are viewed as less powerful than men. So it is gender-based, is based on gender. That is at least my understanding, Now, if I am abused by my girlfriend, for an example, and I want to conceptualize it as gender-based violence, I would be misplacing the issue at hand. And I would be, because what it does is that it makes it difficult to conceptualize it in terms of research. If we're going to term it like that, we need to unpack it more as to, if we are saying that there is a problem in society where males are being violated by their, female counterparts, how do we then conceptualize that? How do we conceptualize violence between, gender non-conforming people, or violence by gender non-conforming people? How do we conceptualize that and put it into research and produce knowledge out of it, and with a goal, of changing society, obviously, So for me, it's based on how we develop these concepts, and strictly with an honest, undertaking of examining these concepts to fit into, diagnosing and healing, societies. I don't know, but I'm trying to just to provide some sort of a comment, but not an answer precisely.
I understood you perfectly, Mhlobam. And in my mind, I'm then thinking the term gender-based violence, in my understanding, was conceptualized at a time where women were abused the most. Exactly. Now, the dynamics have changed. How do we then make it accommodative of everyone? How do we view it? How do we conceptualize it when it's a female abusing a male? How do we conceptualize it when it's a non-gender conforming person abusing a gender conforming person who's a female or a male? I think I precisely understood you, and that is an area of research, and that I think it's very big, that we need to look at the conceptualization of issues and their correct classification allows us to find sustainable solutions. And the last question that we have, then we can close, is from Ayabonga Kingizani, one of your comrades in arms. She asked, how can we coexist as men and women?
That is a very straightforward question. Look, there are complexities, that needs to be taken into consideration. Let's go back again. We spoke about safety. Do the experiences of women allow? Yes, we have to coexist. Let me put it like that. One, do they allow for coexistence that is understood outside of the context? I don't know. I'm trying to let's go to very interesting question. Can gender be conceptualized in accounting studies? That question was very important for me. Let's then park that question there. I think I'm going to boggle myself with a lot, but I'm trying to provide an answer. Let's go to Elokshi. Let's look at coexistence, Elokshi. Yes, it's coexistence. It's coexistence. But is everything all right? Is everything fine? No, it's not. It's coexistence. Those people are coexisting. But is both of them existing? Speaking now, I'm trying to narrow it to just two gender identities. Are they coexisting? Let's include all the identities. I spoke of a situation where one has found himself in a university space and defined themselves and their sexualities. They go back home for holidays, they're excluded because they are strange. They're not accepted because of who they've become. Is that person existing? Let's go back again. We must pick a look sheet. You can see, you don't need to look deeply. You can see, the situation, that there's so much stress, there's so much frustration, there's so much, oppression, there's but destitute, and these people, are trying to find ways of livelihoods. I'm trying to contextualize this in a setting. And these people live together. They coexist in terms of the nominal definition of what coexistence is. But I'm asking again, are they both existing? Or is one living and another one is existing? I believe there's a difference. The thing about power is that in order for power to continue to maintain itself and to self-perpetuate, it needs someone to be oppressed. That's the thing about power. In order for it to continue to be alive, it needs someone to die socially. And that's the thing about the issues that we're dealing with. If want to ask if all of these gender identities want to exist, want to live, something needs to die. Something needs to die. I believe, I don't want to say no, we can never coexist. Someone would say to me, no, man, I believe we need to be incorrect in order to be correct. And we need to think we are correct in order to be, corrected. But I don't believe that people are coexisting in the normal situation that we find ourselves in. I don't believe that all the gender identities, taking into consideration the kind of oppression that historically we come from, the kind of oppression that has, dynamically changed, is it to mutilate? I don't believe that all these gender identities in this normal setting can properly and fully coexist. I believe every day there is resistance, conflict, there is oppression faced by resistance. Every day there is that sort of dialectical, collision, between all these identities because of the main problem. Because obviously, pointed up as something very, very, very important, that we can't exclude, our daily being from capitalist racial thinking. We can't. We have to include it because that is what shapes and defines us. That is what shapes and defines violence against women. That is what shapes and defines the taking away of autonomy of the body of people. That is what defines, the taking away of, the autonomy of defining ourselves outside of what normative thinking has influenced us to believe is correct and is acceptable. So that is what, excludes and erases, gender non-conforming people. That is what, excludes people who are termed, the word has been, negatively understood. I'm gay. Have you listened to people when they speak about gay, lesbian, bisexual people from a position of strangeness? They don't relate. Hence, I'm saying one has to be erased in order for the one to live. So there's an ever existing conflict between all these gender identities because there's a question of power relations that is there. I believe this question is packed. Hence, when I started, I said it's a straightforward question, but it's packed. It has to take into consideration many concepts and aspects of it.
Thank you very much, Mhlobam. We still need to have the conversation. It's a long way. Sis Melissa has a question. Sis Melissa, if you want to ask the question directly without typing it, you can unmute your mic and you can have the question. While we wait for Sis Melissa to unmute her mic, Mhlobam, as you're unpacking this, you reminded me of a book by Ta-Nehisi Coates, where he writes on his book Between the World and Me, and he talk in the sense of America, that he was interviewed by a white woman, and he says, as I watched this white woman talk about my body as a subject point, and the fact that he will never have autonomy over his body, there's always going to be that conflict. It reminds me of that. Sis Melissa is on the line and she's going to ask her question. Thank you very much, Sis Melissa, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Interesting conversation. I've joined the conversation with a friend of mine. I just have one question. It's also based on my beliefs, based on our history as Africans. I believe that as Africans, we're not a violent society. And as a result of that, abantu abangomama in our African societies were held in very high stature. Men would not make decisions consult abantu abangomama. They would not do anything without consulting or without including abantu abangomama in society. However, we don't see that inclusivity today in our societies, in our African societies and all the different societies. And this is after colonialism and everything else that's happened to us as Africans. But have we done enough research to then find out how do we then go back to our state as abantu abamnyama that value women and what we bring to communities and to our society as abantu abangomama, so as to curb all these things that are happening, gender-based violence, less because it was not something that was part of our society's dala. Andifuni nokuthi ke into eze nabelungu, andifuni ukutsho, but into esiyibonayo ngoku after all these things that's happened to us as Africans. Uyayiva ne? So I'm just trying to find out, because yes, I'm very passionate and I'm also an activist when it comes to gender-based violence. However, I've not read any study that's done research on that and how we can maybe get ourselves back to indlela besikade siphila ngayo, so as to avoid these things that are happening in our society as fana gender-based violence lesithetha ngayo ke namhlanje. I don't know if my question is clear.
You are very clear. You are very clear. I remember yamkhumbula uMondekazi Isa.
Yes.
There was a lecture that we attended. I don't know if it's 2018 or 2019, but Professor Sesanti speaking about the exact same, topic, about. But have we looked back enough to find out who we are? The issue that I want to look into in trying to frame not an answer but a comment is ndibuyele khona enye intetho that uNkrumah speaks about, that in as much as we can never go back, the society is developing. But what is it that we take from who we were? And I believe that is exactly what you are saying. That what is it that we take from who we were? That value of human life, that value of another person, that umntu ngabantu, I believe there's a part, I don't know if but there's a part where I even downloaded the book Umama Oye Ronke Oye Wumi from is it Nigeria?
Yeah, I think it's
believe,
Nigeria.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
it's
included her in
Nigerian.
this study in the literature review. She speaks so much about the differences between how gender is understood in Western knowledge systems, and how gender and the organization of society was understood in ancient Nigerian societies, and how, gender was not the main, form of organizing society, but experience, wisdom, and age, were the way in which society was organized. So you would have women, exactly as Sis Melissa said, included in all the structures and authorities of society, and without any exclusion. But also, Sis Melissa, again, I don't want us to simplify it and say that I believe we need nuance to say there is, studies that, have come, along with the discussion to say, no, these things existed in Africa, but the question is, what was the response? I believe, for me, whenever there is an issue in society, especially in all epochs, of development, what is the response? For me, the response determines, how the society, related to a certain order or dominant order or norms, of societal tendencies. For an example, if today we are speaking about, the rise, of Black capitalists, if maybe there is a rise, or maybe they have already risen, and how they are going to form a very important part of the capitalist system itself, and how that problematic itself needs to be understood. It needs to be understood from a position of the response, the resistance to it. So I don't know, in as much as we have to learn from that, but we also have to learn the responses in the existence, or in the alleged resistance, alleged existence of, the violence, the exclusion. I believe that studies have pointed, to the fact that, in polygamous marriages, there were issues of ownership, there were issues of, violence that took place. But how did society respond to that? That is what we need to learn from and take something from, in order to define, ourselves going forward, and take from, especially this thing, as Fumelana Koiba, umuntu ngabantu. And that is what, we are built on as African societies, that we value the other person, because we also want to be valued, and us valuing that person is also and that's good. It's also us, understanding that human life is a determination of, ourselves also. Let me pack it there.
Thank you very much, Pepe. What I will ask of you now is to just, in 2 minutes, not long, to point us into a direction. What are the areas that you think this study that you have done, we need to stretch it forward from? From where you've left it, where do we go forward? The suggestion of topics to continue to understand ourselves and understand the conversation.
In 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes.
Me, me, I start from this position, that we cannot define. In fact, you agreed with me. We cannot start from a position of abstraction, as if we do not have a background, we don't have a development. We are excluded ourselves as a nation. We're excluded as a class, excluded as gender identities. We are just people that are faced by constant exclusion. The first point for me is to eliminate the system that informs that exclusion. What is this system that informs the exclusion of a people? What is this exclusion that informs, the exclusion of women in particular, Black women, poor Black women, working class Black women? So we need an intersectional understanding, of our oppression. We need an intersectional understanding of how the society has developed into where it is today. Then we can frame a way forward if we can start from there. I believe that is what now I'm critiquing myself, that I didn't raise too much the questions of classes in my study, maybe because I was also in a process of development, so which I believe that they shape our identities, so we need to take all of that into consideration and eliminate this system that keeps on perpetuating and maintaining itself based on exclusion, power, and violence.
Thank you very much. And Sis Melissa, I will recommend that you also look at one of the conversations I had with Bizo Bomela. It's on our YouTube page, the Young Researchers Hub, where he was interrogating the spiritual traditional roles of Xhosa women in the contemporary South Africa, as he stretches back as to what was the position of women back then and what is the position of women at the current moment. And just to add on the comment we're having, we once had this conversation again with Ayabonga Mtingizane, and as we're having the conversation, he posed something that was so important to say that maybe, because at one point she was talking about how the young male figures felt that Odadobawo, who were married, were now coming at home and having a position of power. We're not supposed to have a position of power because they're married. And the conversation from her side was that because there's been a breakage in the transferring of information from one generation to the other, the young generation does not understand that responsibility or that position of whether you are married or not. As a Dadobao, you have this particular role in a family, regardless of where you are in your life. And all these other things now will then fall into the issue that the complexities you're talking about and the nuances that we need to understand is because there has not been an information transfer from one generation to the other. So for me to challenge with Dadobao is because I don't understand why is this person coming at home when they married and all of these other issues. It's based on our socialization. And to continue on the question that you're saying, that we need to take it back. What happened and how did we get here? Thank you very much, Sofefe, for your time. And thank you to everyone who listened and took their time as much as you stretched it. And this is the reason why I developed Young Researchers Hub. I wanted to develop a platform where people are not restricted in unpacking their research. We can take time to unpack research because it's a learning tool, as compared to having it for 30 minutes and thinking that that's all that there is to the research. So thank you very much. I know the conversation needs to still be ongoing. There's still more. You add into the conversation that we had with Bizo now, as Mrs. Melissa had just brought that. So it means the conversation is in different parts, all connected together. There's a linkage that we need to find at ourselves at one point in having the discussion. From the Young Researchers Hub, we thank you for your time, we thank you for your support, and we thank you that you continue to engage with us. And I hope that we grow and this becomes a fountain of knowledge for many of our people who cannot have access to research, be it academical or journals. As I mentioned, that Young Researchers Hub was created because brilliant research papers are collecting dust in university libraries. Journal articles are available only to a fraction of people in our society, yet these researchers are carrying so much information society. And in that regard, I thank you very much for your continued participation into the Young Researchers Hub. And just as we're closing, someone said, today, many of the questions I had are being answered. Thank you. So thanking you for that is good, Louisville, Siwisa, as we're having the conversation. From the Young Researchers Hub, Have a great weekend. Sanitize, social distance. Take care of yourself. The pandemic is still out there. Our people are dying. And the only way to beat it is if we come together and fight this demon that has found itself in our society. And for me, Sasipinko Simtingi, your host, I'm wishing you a great weekend. And I'm wishing you a great week as we're going to start a week next week. And we are going to the Youth Month. A lot of discussion are going to be had. A lot is need to be said as we reflect into 27 years into democracy, as we reflect 60 years plus since the June 16, and there are many conversations that we need to have as our young people are excluded in institutions of higher learning. And from me tonight, I say good night and thank you very much for your time and dedication. I love you.